we're just thrilled to have Dr. Fisher with us and Shontelle with us today. And we're going to speak about, I think, a topic of importance to many of us. Many of us have heard about CPR, and maybe fewer have heard about the emotional CPR. So we're delighted to bring this work to you today. You know our team. I'm sure you know our Dr. John Higginbottom. This work was really his brainchild, so we're very appreciative to him. You see Manny, who's a wonderful technical sort in the back often, and Jen. You've seen Jen, and Jordan is the man who really built our platform for us. So we're very grateful to him. So your team is here today to really have another great session. Advanced Practice was initially supported by the Ministry of Health here in British Columbia, and now we're very grateful to Douglas College for their continued support to make this work happen. We're also very, very grateful to I believe this is our 63rd webinar on the website, and people do this work for no money, really. So we're just very grateful to people for their volunteering. And hopefully with that work for Advanced Practice, we're really concerned about transferring that evidence-based and promising practices for people delivering and receiving services. So we're hoping that this work that we do is supporting your work. We, of course, always want to hear from you. If you have ideas, if you hear of a new program, if you're involved in something innovative yourself and you wish to tell us about it, we always really we really love to hear from you around that as well. So maybe just go to the next slide, Jen, if that's okay. And as Douglas College staff, we just wish to acknowledge the Coquitlam and Pequot First Nations, as well as all Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territory we live, learn, play, and work. So an acknowledgement there. And for those of you who are Douglas College people, our president and team just launched this wonderful new crest this week. So have a look at our website. It's just a marvelous, marvelous piece of artwork that I think is deeply symbolic and just represents a lot of Indigenous ways of being and local iconic land things. But anyway, have a look. It's just really awesome. So at the end, we will have a link so that you can tell us how good we're doing and give us some feedback and let us know if you would be interested in doing a presentation. So we will send that to you at the very end of this presentation. And Jen, let's go to the next slide. So just to be aware, Mental Health Commission as well of Canada, great resources on that website. Please be aware of the upcoming conference in April, Back to Recovery, supported by Dr. Mike Slade from the UK. So hope to see many of you there. And PSR Canada will indeed be supporting that conference as well, be there present hopefully. And yes, and just to let you know about staying tuned about upcoming webinars, we're hoping to have a February webinar from Blake Lotz in Edmonton, Edmonton, Alberta, and talk about unique peer support community that has gained national attention from there. And then in March, we're having Corey Ranger from Westside Harm Reduction with extensive expertise supporting harm reduction initiatives in Alberta. So we look forward to those really great presentations in the future. And then today we start with Dr. Daniel Fisher, who is on the camera right now. So he notes that while carrying out neurotransmitter research at NIMH, he was labeled with schizophrenia, recovered a full life in the community through loving relationships and peer support. To humanize the mental health system, he worked as a community psychiatrist and founded the National Empowerment Center. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with that organization. He was a member of the New Freedom Commission on Mental Health, helped organize the National Coalition of Mental Health Recovery, helped develop this emotional CPR that he'll speak to us about today, and wrote a book called Heartbeats of Hope. So it is a great joy to have Dr. Fisher with us today. We also have another wonderful speaker with us today, and that's Shontelle Prokipcak. I'm sure I didn't do that correctly, but I'm sure you'll help us, Shontelle. And Shontelle worked with Daniel in Canada at an event where he introduced this emotional CPR that we'll speak about today. And she just learned about what he was doing in the United States to reduce physical and chemical restraints in hospital settings. And then Shontelle decided she needed to learn more and bring this refreshing approach to Canadians. So we're so delighted to have her today. She spent the last 2 years participating, the last year, pardon me, participating in 2-day programs. She has seen it applied across many cultural settings, and it's common sense, she says, beautifully flexible and powerful, and she will contribute to provide the eCPR program in Canada throughout mental health and addiction services of Ottawa, with growing member of facilitators. So we look forward so much to hear her experience with that initiative. And she's hoping to bring this work to rural and remote communities, which we know are in need of a great deal of support, especially in Canada. We have big countryside, don't we? And so many of you, I'm sure, will speak to that today on this chat. So with all that, thank you very much, Jen, for doing that. I'm going to pass you over to Dr. Fisher, and I'm going to be the slide person. So I just need a moment to pull up his slides, and then Dr. Fisher will start his conversation. And here we go. Oopsie daisy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Regina, and Shontelle. Thank you for being part of this presentation. I'm going to cover a bit of my own recovery experience, and then show how that motivated me and a group of other people lived experience to create emotional CPR as a way to really implement many of the values that we've learned as most important to our recovery. And so the next slide shows a book that I've written, and it's called Heartbeats of Hope. And this experience actually of writing the book was very important in terms of trying to understand more about my own recovery, recovery of not from an illness, but recovery of my life. And I think I encourage people as part of their recovery experience, if they can, and feel comfortable with it, to write it down. What was most important, what was most helpful, because this is very, it still remains pretty new territory. 25, 30 years ago, when I started the National Empowerment Center, recovery was not frequently used concept or word. Remission was really what people talked about, because the idea was that severe psychiatric problems such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder were somehow lifelong conditions, and the best you could do was just suppress the symptoms, but not really recover a life. And I was just very fortunate to find ways to heal and to recover. And then people asked, and then I became a psychiatrist, and I'll tell you a little more about that. But people would ask me, they'd say, well, you know, how did this happen? How did you do it? Quite honestly, I didn't have a plan like set out ahead of time. This is how I'm going to recover from schizophrenia. And actually, it was in the 70s, and there were no concept really that people very frequently at all did recover from schizophrenia. So it was really sort of feeling my way along. So I'll tell you a little about myself. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. It's a little bit southern, but a little bit northern in the United States. We have significant regional differences in manners and behavior, and Maryland is a pretty open. People are pretty open in Maryland, but I was raised in what's called a WASP, or White Anglo-Saxon Protestant family, which was mostly doctors. My father, my grandfather, my uncle, my brother-in-law. And the next slide shows you a picture in 1953 of my family. If you want to show the next slide. Yeah, so pretty serious. A friend of ours actually is Bobby Kennedy Jr. looked at this, and he's from an Irish family, and he said, "Oh my gosh, look at that family." such a Protestant family. And very serious. I'm the young man standing at attention right in the middle there with a tie, and right behind me is my father. He was a doctor, and and my mother is just to his right, and then her brother, who's also a doctor, and then my sister sitting down next to me, to my left. She married a doctor, and the young boy who's about my size off to the right, a first cousin, he became a doctor. None of the women became doctors, but they were encouraged to marry doctors. So it was a serious group. And unfortunately, my younger sister, who's in the doll, Lark, she developed psychological problems at a pretty young age. She was 8 years old, and she's okay with me mentioning it. She feels it's important for people to know that she's had a rough time. And my family kept saying, oh, it must be a chemical problem, because they were a medical family. And so naturally, I went off to try to solve her problems. What I didn't realize was how angry I was. And I think when you suppress a lot of feelings, as this group you can see is doing a lot of suppression of feelings, you've developed anger. So the next slide shows a drawing that I did of sort of myself as a teenager and young man. Cut off from my feelings a little dramatically, so that, you know, my head is really not attached to my body, and my heart is separated from my thoughts. And I think that in many instances leads to anger. I wanted to be a scientist and solve my sister's problems. So I went to my father had a friend who was director of the National Institute of Mental Health, and I was 19. And this very eminent doctor in the next slide shows me as a supplicant before the eminent doctor behind the desk, Dr. Ketty, who was very well known in his field. And I said, I want to solve my sister's problems. I don't think it said my sister's problems. I want to solve the problems of mental health issues and mental, psychiatric problems. And he said, oh, go to the laboratory. That's what you should do. You should become a biochemist, because that's where the answers will lie. Well, it was 1962, 1963, and actually people still think that that's where the answers lie, a lot of people. But many of you all probably in the audience, you work in the psychosocial field, you must realize there's a whole lot more to life than just our narrow chemistry. It took me a little while to discover that, but partly through my own misfortune. The next slide shows my wife. I was only married for 2 years. I was 25. I just gotten my PhD in biochemistry, should have been at the top of the world, but she walked right out the door. She said, this idea that emotions are all determined by chemistry is really very, it leaves me cold. And so she left, and I was heartbroken. And that sort of led me to therapy and a much deeper understanding. The next slide shows me in psychoanalysis, lying on the couch. It was a year, 5 days a week. I'm not sure it was really the best way to start therapy when I was so distraught. But maybe that's what I had to start at, because I was so much in my head. If someone had said, you need to be in touch with your heart, I think I would have been very flustered. But I did join a dance group, and I grew long hair. I tried psychedelics, anything to try to open up. I kind of knew deep down I had to open up. The next slide shows, it's a little busy slide, but this shows 1969 on the left. I'm presenting my findings of my research, my biochemical research that I got my PhD on, which was about cell growth and how lymphocytes grow. So you see me in a green suit standing on the sort of the Greek temple of Dartmouth University, giving this talk on steps in cell growth. I was very orderly. very methodical, very unemotional. I walked down after giving the talk, and there you see me talking to this graduate student with a beard, and he says, "Hey man, were you stoned? Let's try this purple peace pill." And it was mescaline, and that was sort of the beginning of a whole new chapter in my life. And I just knew that I needed to open up, but I kind of blinded myself by how quickly I opened up, because within about a half an hour, I was hugging a tree in my green suited young man there. And I had two insights though. One was, you see time sort of dripping off the tree. Time lasts forever. And that was a great relief. I think I was feeling like I didn't have enough time. I'd got my PhD at age 24. I don't know what was the big hurry. Somehow I didn't feel like I had enough time. And then, although I didn't take all my clothes off, I did take my jacket off, and honestly don't know what happened to that green suit. I was stood on a rock, and I realized, standing on this rock, I realized I'm connected to all life. So I had felt disconnected before, and this was the beginning of feeling connected. And the next slide shows another way of connecting, which was to join a dance group. So I was going to the laboratory during the day, weighing and measuring and doing chemical research on dopamine and serotonin. And then by night and on weekends, I was part of this dance group trying to express myself and open up. And it was great to do it, but I felt in great conflict. And I had a dream as part of my sort of recovery of self. And the next slide shows this image in my dream. So in the dream, I'm seeing these young men, and they're two young men doing research in a dungeon, in a castle. And every once in a while, they try to leave, and their boss, who's he's actually a colonel, he said, "You can't leave because your brain looks like this gargoyle," which is, then I drew it later just from memory of the dream. And I thought, and then an independent researcher came in and said, actually, these two young men were fine. Their brains are fine. They just had looked through a microscope too long, and they just needed to get out into the outside. They had to spend some time out of laboratory, and they left. And this was a big struggle for me. And early in my recovery, I had to come to grips with the fact that maybe I really was deep down healthy. And many times when young men come to see me now, I say, "What were you told about your condition? If you were diagnosed with a severe condition, what were you told?" And many still today are told that they have a basic biological brain disorder, even though there is no evidence that a specific biological disorder being linked to a specific diagnosis. And even the National Institute of Mental Health director, Thomas Insel, recently said, we cannot, after, like 40, 50 years and billions of dollars, we cannot find a single diagnostic group that's defined by a single biological difference. And this dream, by the way, I was doing meditation, which I find very helpful at times. I really recommend it for people to quiet down. They're clanging just thoughts in the background. I visualized this in the dream, what I had seen of the picture of this gargoyle. And I don't know if people can see in the background behind the this animal, very angry looking animal, is a map of the US. And that map actually reminded me of a sixth grade history map. And it reminded me that my sixth grade teacher took myself and other young boys down into the basement of the school building, which is called the dungeon, and sexually abused us. And we're just now, 50 years later, investigating what happened. In those days, they sent him off and didn't take any criminal action. Um, but I continued after I had wonderful therapists, by the way. I had friends and family that were supportive. I was in a type of peer support before it was peer support. And the next slide shows the sort of my transition from at the bottom, fear and anger and feeling that I really couldn't continue with my life. And then through love, through my family, through my girlfriend, who ultimately became my wife, I learned to say yes to life and learned that I could have hope. And the following slide shows the transition that I made from this red figure on the left, where I was always acting for other people and felt disconnected, disempowered, and numb. And then I was able to become the self that I wanted to be, to assert myself, to find a voice. And it's really through feeling connected to other people, and then feeling that that I existed and I mattered, and that I could actually have a life. So that I part of my gaining a life was to actually, when I got out of my second hospitalization, and I was hospitalized on 3 occasions, and I met the criteria of schizophrenia. Some people say, well, I couldn't have really been schizophrenic because how could I have recovered and then gone on and became a psychiatrist and get married, have 2 daughters? How could I do that? But many people do recover from quite severe psychiatric conditions, but most people remain silent because the stigma is still so great. So I've been speaking up because I really wanted people to know that the people do recover. And I can't see the chat section, but Regina, if there's anybody who has a question.
Well, we're good. Yeah, we're good for now.
What's that?
We're good for now. No chats for now. No questions.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Somebody's saying they just have a question. So carry
Sure.
on and just maybe type it in. And then when it's typed in, I can just pass it along. Thank you.
Okay. Raphael. So what in about 12 years ago, started developing emotional CPR as a way to implement what I found most important in recovery. Now here's the question: do I feel what's it is about psychedelics?
Yes. Yeah. Helped you to open up and expand your awareness.
Yes, I think they did. And I understand that Johns Hopkins and a few other universities, maybe some in Canada, are starting to explore the use of small amounts of psychedelics to open up. And I would advise, doing the opening up around people that have used psychedelics. I had 3 trips. The first 2 were fantastic and opened me up a great deal. The third one, I think, was something much stronger. It was 1970, and there was very little, 1969, 70, there was very little understanding or control of what was in the psychedelics. I think it was STP, Serenity, Tranquility, Peace. And that trip lasted for about 4 days. And then I couldn't come back. And I went into what's called catatonia. And only thing that brought me back that time and on a second occasion was the less formally trained people. They were the psych techs in a Navy hospital, and they just used nonverbal communication because I was not using words. And so if you go to the next slide, it shows our emotional CPR is the section that I wanted to cover, and then bring in Shontelle. Was there more to that question, by the way? It seemed like it was.
There was a second question, so I don't know if you
Okay.
want to answer it now or hold it to the end, but this person's asking, you mentioned something like there's no single diagnostic group that is defined by biological difference. Can you speak to that a little further?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went into research because I believed that, we would find that the dopamine was disordered, and maybe in psychosis, and serotonin, maybe norepinephrine were responsible, too much or too little, for depression. But we're much more complex than that. There are at least 100 neurotransmitters that have been identified now, and each one has multiple receptors. It's kind of lucky that we're more complicated than just a few of them. And they just haven't found consistently differences that point to one or another diagnostic group. And I think there are differences between people, just like some people are left-handed, some people are right-handed. We seem to need this variation. I have two daughters that they're very creative. They're very sensitive. They both are artists, and I think they see the world differently than some other kids. They've adapted, but some people's adaptation takes longer, and trauma is a big factor. I think for me, and a lot of people who experience psychosis, there's a history of sexual or physical abuse, and that takes a while to heal. But I was very, very fortunate. I had a terrific therapist. He was a psychiatrist, and I'm not opposed to medication. He wasn't, but it was not medication primarily that brought me back. And I haven't actually been on medication for 40 years. I do prescribe it. I hand somebody a script and I say, this medicine, this medication here, it'll buy you a little time. It'll reduce the intensity of some of your emotions, but you need to solve the problem. And with relationship building, with having purpose and a sense of meaning, and it's not going to come from magically rebalancing some chemical. So I don't know. That's. But I do want to say I'm not anti-psychiatry. I am board certified. I practice psychiatry, and I just think that there's a different way of doing psychiatry. I'm opposed to this narrow biological psychiatry that only sees just a narrow band of chemistry. We're full human beings, thank heavens, and I hope we don't succumb overly to the advertising by pharmaceuticals that have convinced the general public that somehow somebody is acting unusually, that it's because their chemistry is disordered. It's a lot of times you have to think differently, act differently in order to put together many different parts of your life. You can't. Living a life is pretty complicated. It's pretty amazing. I wake up, I'm 76 at this point. I wake up in the morning, I go, wow, this is really amazing that we can communicate and talk and have relationships. And so I just think that reducing this to chemistry is, it's a tragedy, to be perfectly honest, because it distracts us from the real work, which is how can we communicate? And that's this emotional CPR. That's the love of my life at this point, as I believe very deeply that not just people that have been labeled mentally ill, but that our entire population, and I mean especially the industrial world, is at great risk right now of severe psychological issues because we're losing the capacity to relate, the capacity to communicate, the capacity to live a life, to create a life. And in developing countries actually are a little bit more protected because they're not so convinced that they can figure it all out. We can't figure it out. We're making it up as we go along, and we need each other to do that. And this is what emotional CPR is about: is to try to in a way, remind the industrial world of what the developing countries still know. I mean, I go to Puerto Rico from time to time. and they don't need this training. They teach me. I walk in and they give me a big hug, and you know, so nice to see you. They smile. Their heart is on their sleeve. And I go to North America and, you know, my own New England, and everybody's like, hello, how are you? I mean, I grew up in an area of, in Maryland, an area where people actually still do tend to smile and say hello more often. And I mean, I don't want to be overly critical of my own, you know, New England, but they really should loosen up here. And you probably see regional differences in, you know, in Canada as well, I'm sure, you know. So, so I'll give a quick overview, and then I really want Shontelle, if she could, to share something of her own experience with emotional CPR. So the next slide shows what we try to do, which is we teach this in a group, and I don't really like the word teach. I learn as much as I share or teach. It's an experience. Each 2-day period is more like a shared experience, and we really try to emphasize about 20 people in a 2-day training, and there'll be 2 facilitators, and we really try to emphasize the building of the group right from the beginning, right from the start, because we want the group to be a container for safety, for people to share emotions, which, you know, I mean, as I was saying, it's unfamiliar in a lot of our, you know, northern cultures to share emotions. So people, I mean, some countries, like I was in Scotland, I go to Scotland and they keep inviting me back, but they do say, we don't share emotions. I'm like, oh, this will be very challenging. And they eventually do, but I have to help create enough of a holding environment that they're like, okay, it's okay, we can share. And so these ideas, and we call them we CPR actually, is how you build the group right from the beginning. We ask people to leave their hat at the door, their rank, their serial number, their, you know, their role at the door. And I generally feel more comfortable being Dan than Dr. Fisher. I've accepted the title here in the introduction just because that's, you know, more familiar to you all. But then we try to see that differences are something to value, and we respect them. Differences between people, male, female, queer, gay, trans, white, black, brown, old, young. These are all ways of understanding different perspectives in the world. And we encourage people to share heart to heart and enter a neutral space, not judgmental, and really hear other people's beliefs. And the next slide is just a brief thing of describing the difference between CPR, which people have heard of probably, cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Regina, if you could just show the next slide. And emotional CPR. So it's a catchy sort of thing. We thought, well, you know, restart people's emotional heart. That's what we're really trying to do, is to restart that our emotional heart has become numb through, you know, overemphasis on the cognitive and the rational and the suppressing our feelings. So we, the next slide shows sort of a distillation of 12 years of work in this. And by the way, this is different than mental health first aid. Some of you may be familiar with mental health first aid, and I sort of make a joke that you don't think so funny. The best thing about mental health first aid is it made myself and other people who lived experience so angry that we developed this alternative. And I mean so angry because I'm part of a consumer survivor ex-patient movement in the United States and have been for 40 years. And our main intent has been to demonstrate that people have self-determination is very, very important, and nothing about us without us, and we don't want to be labeled. We're people, not labels. And oh my God, mental health first aid is like teaching the general public to label everybody. And so we're very respectful, though, because it has a lot of people behind it, and good people are at times teaching it. So we say, well, maybe they can, after they learn mental health first aid, they can learn how to actually help somebody. And we don't use labels at all. You go through the whole 2 days, hopefully you wouldn't hear a single diagnostic term. We just say people are distressed, they have feelings, sometimes the feelings are very big, they get very frightened, they might withdraw, they get very angry, they might, want to express themselves, very sad. These are not pathological. You lose somebody, you cry. If men cried a lot more, we'd probably have less war, we'd have less other problems like we have in this country right now. Don't want to go into those, but we got a lot of male problems, and I think these values you'll see probably are more towards the feminist end, and generally women pick this up quicker than men. My older daughter is now a trainer. She's teaching me already a lot that I should have learned. I do see a couple of chats. I'm open to a couple of questions, and maybe also, Shontelle, if you hear a question you want to chime in on, please feel free to. Yeah.
Dan,
yeah.
we've just had a number of comments of appreciation rather than questions at this point, just people saying it's rather refreshing to hear this perspective with less emphasis on pharmaceuticals and shifting the focus to social connection, relationship building, and interventions like expressive arts and therapeutic activities. So yeah, just a lot of positive feedback.
Wow, it's sure nice to speak to a friendly audience. It isn't always the case. I'm thrilled that you all are appreciative of this approach, and that heartens me for the future, because I sometimes feel worried that people are only hearing this other message. I think probably my hunch a little bit is, in Canada you haven't been inundated yet, and I hope it won't happen, as much by the pharmaceutical propaganda as we have. But just keep your borders firm. Keep it safe up there. So we have intentions of emotional CPR. We call them intentions. They're not rules. They're not strict principles you just have to follow. And then maybe Shontelle, I'll mention one of them. You could sort of chime in. How about that?
Sure. That sounds great. Yep.
The first one is that I will connect through feelings first, not words first. And this is a little bit different. People have been trained in counseling, think that they should, ask a lot of questions. We discourage especially questions of inquiry, maybe curiosity, but not inquiry. We also have a
That's okay. Don't worry. It's all good.
My wife. Yeah.
Yes, you're welcome. Nice to meet her. Hello. Do a little wave. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Need a little assistance here.
Of course. No problem. Right.
Couldn't open a drink.
Great.
Life is what happens after you make plans. Let's face it. So we try to connect through our feelings and respect each other as equally human, and listen with our eyes, our ears, our heart, and our respect. And they're actually, I did this in Singapore, and one of the participants said, "Oh, the Chinese character for listen, Ting, has all this encompassed in it," and the next slide shows that. Chinese character. You didn't know you were going to be learning a little Chinese. But it's really fascinating. within this character, there are sub-characters for respect, ears, 10 eyes. I still haven't gotten a clear explanation, but it must be like you're looking with 10 eyes, complete attention, and your heart. So right within the character for listen is all these parts. And, you know, we're lucky if we listen with our ears. Don't want to get down on men too much, but we tend as men to listen almost exclusively with our ears and say we heard every word that, you know, maybe our wife said. And really what it'd be better if we could listen with our hearts more often and say what we felt first rather than what we heard. Shontelle, what's this?
Yeah, so I think that big piece for me when I'm looking at the connecting piece is that people come in, so as a clinician or when I'm working in the eCPR mode, is that we need to take more time with being present first. If you don't make yourself present, and that requires the listening with your ears, your heart, and with respect, that you're really not listening yet, because you're not there yet. So you have to come into the space, into being with that human that you're interacting with, and then we can start being curious. But we can't be curious until we're actually there in the room. And so that piece of connecting for me is, what do I feel when I'm in here with you? What is it like for me to be in this space with you? Right? And what does it feel like in terms of how you might be feeling and how I'm picking up on that? Right? And so when I met Dan, that was the thing. He came up to speak. We were at a pretty dry conference. People were really quiet at the conference. And there wasn't a lot of interaction between people, although the conference was supposed to be about that. It was supposed to be a dialogue, but there wasn't a lot of dialogue going on. I know because I tried to get everybody to do a shake and release to relax. And they thought that was pretty out there. And it was fun, but it was interesting to see the difference also when Dan spoke about not using chemical and physical restraints as much and using connection instead. And, you know, I think that really sat or resonated with people. Maybe it was foreign to them in terms of idea or concept, but I think that it certainly sat with me as someone who was in the room prepared to provide support for people there. Because I had a role there to provide support as we talked about restraints, because it is a very traumatizing experience to be restrained. And so that connecting piece and observing everybody, I had the opportunity to really observe everybody in the room, and that connecting piece is essential, I think, to us actually really deeply being there and being able to help somebody. That presence is the key piece. So that's kind of how I see that listening piece.
It's interesting. You're reminding me about that conference, and there was a woman there, Jennifer Chalmers, I think. She's from Toronto, and she was the only other person who identified as a person lived experience besides myself. And she was pretty quiet. I mean, a lot of people were pretty quiet. And at one point, I said, you know, we just have to speak up, those of us who lived experience, because we have experienced what this is like. We've experienced being restrained and secluded. And I think there should be a simulation in some way that anybody who is a practitioner should have some experience of being hospitalized. And you can't do that, of course, ethically. Although there was a sociologist that Rosenhan that did that in the US in the early 70s and had people just say they heard a click and they were hospitalized, and only the patients knew that they were stooges. And they were writing notes. They were there as a research study, and they were accused of being hypergraphic, of having excessive writing. So once you're in that setting, you're seen through that lens very much, the setting of a hospital. But it did, just when you were saying that, Shontelle. It reminded me of being, I was not restrained, but I was physically restrained. I was held down by people and given a forcible injection on several occasions. And I still feel angry about that. And I'm one instance, I just give you one quick instance, just showing the importance of understanding and connection. I'd had a pass to go off to my lab, which was ironically across the street from my hospital. So I went over to my laboratory one day and I was so happy to be there. I came back and they said, "How do you feel?" And I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, I feel 11. No, in a hospital, you don't want to be too
You're
happy.
not allowed to do that.
No, you don't want to be too happy or too sad.
Now we have a question here. I'm not sure if this is a good time for it, but Isabella asked, what I'm hearing is a very similar to Eugene Glendon's focusing. And the question is, have you heard about that?
Glendon. Oh, yes. I never met him. I'm not sure he's still alive. He built on Carl Rogers, who's a big hero of mine. And Genlin, yes, Genlin did talk a lot, or does, through focusing. I think still, they still utilize a lot in the nonverbal dimension. So there is similarities to that. I think we tried to translate this into everyday terms. So this is not only helpful for clinicians, but we feel it's helpful for everybody in any interaction. So this is not a therapeutic technique per se. So in Poland, several people got some training, and they said, "Oh, well, now we can be emotional CPR therapists." And I was like, "No." Not to be, take the place of therapeutic training, but it does, I think, enhance the capacity of therapists or parents or teachers to connect in such a way that you can elicit the growth of the young person or the person distressed that you're assisting. And really, I think that what therapy is about is just to get somebody back on the track of personal development. We have certain interruptions, traumas that interrupt our capacity to continue to expand and learn who we are and who other people are. We're not here on this earth very long. It may seem like it, at certain times, but there's an awful lot to learn very quickly. And the sooner we sort of get rid of the distractions and try to focus on really who we are and who other people are, I think the sooner we'll have a happier lives for everyone.
We have a wonderful comment here from Paula, who says, "I've been living with mental health issues, for over 40 years. And although traditional mental health treatment has played a part, it is connection, peer support, wellness, recovery, action planning that has transformed my recovery."
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, RAP Plan, Mary Ellen Copeland is also a wonderful person. And RAP planning, I think, has been very important. And actually, this emotional CPR, I see it as sort of pre-RAP. The part that RAP assumes that you know how to connect a little bit, or that people around you know how to connect. This takes it, we're trying to dial back to the very first moment, just like Shontelle described, when you're first encountering someone, not only in a therapeutic situation, but just, "Hello, how are you?" In any situation, especially with someone new. And I personally, when I was younger, I had what was described as paranoia. It was just fear of people. But part of it was I didn't know how to open up myself enough to elicit responses from other people. I was just waiting for them to sort of fill me in. And I was more a blank slate. And I've only learned more recently that the more active you can be in a interaction, the more you learn about yourself and other people, because you then engage actively in the relationship. And I just say to people who are experiencing paranoia, just get to know yourself and know other people, and the paranoia will recede. It's a misperception because you think you are, you come to conclusions too quickly, which brings us actually to the second, a second intention, which would probably be new to you, Shontelle. And we are evolving this, this training evolves with every experience, every training. And I probably do 20 or 30 of these a year, and in that process, learn. And we didn't have this number 2. We went from 1 to what's now 3, and we said, as Shontelle described, you're having a feeling and being with the person, and we say, well, share some of that feeling with them. But we found out, and especially if someone's angry, and anger is a more complex emotion to deal with. If they're angry, your first feeling might be one of defensiveness. What did I do wrong? Or, are you angry at me? Or, are you going to do anything, to hurt yourself or someone else? And those aren't necessarily the best feelings to share right away, because that then can make the person themselves, frightened of their own anger and feel like, they can't express it. Maybe, oh, it was too much for you. I had this, and these real plays that we do, they're not role plays. We actually ask people during the course of the 2 days to share something of their own distress on the one hand, and someone else to assist them with that distress. So I had this guy, he was probably, I'm 5'10", he must have been 6'5", really tall, really big guy. And he's like leaning into me and in the real play, and he's saying, I don't think you can understand what it's like to be a soldier, in Iraq. And I had people coming at me, and I had to kill somebody, and he was like, argh. And I just was like, I don't know what it's like, but please tell me. I really want to know. I really do. But I had to kind of calm myself down a little bit at first. My first reaction would have been something like, oh my gosh, you're really frightening me. But I sort of walked myself through it. So we now have the second intention. I will hold the space for my first feelings, allow them to resonate inside, become aware of my broader feelings and thoughts, which to me were he hadn't been heard. I just had the feeling no one had heard him. And I said, I'm really, really curious. I want to hear it. And he looked at me and he said, you really are? He said, I frighten people away usually. I tell them that's, about what it's like to be in Iraq, and they're like frightened and they don't want to hear. I said, no, I really do want to hear, because I really want to understand it. He said, you really are, you really do, genuinely. And I find that if you can connect in this fashion with curiosity, like Shontelle was saying, with curiosity and with openness, the people, they can't hold their anger. Their anger starts to dissolve. Because people, they'll say, well, does this work with when people are angry? Very well, because 9 out of 10 times people are angry because they haven't been heard, and they haven't been felt, they haven't been understood. That's what people really want. Shontelle, since this is new to you, this intention, how does it strike you?
I love it, actually, because it's so true, because our first reaction that we have emotionally is often historical, right? We've learned about something in the past that makes us have a response perhaps to anger, that anger is dangerous, right? So that's our historical learning, right? And so we don't know that this person, this big fellow, is necessarily dangerous in the current moment. So holding space for our reaction that happened first, and allowing us then to think about what's actually happening in the present moment, which is the curiosity part. I don't know what's going to happen now. Mm-hmm. And then allowing to have that broader sense of feelings, thoughts, and curiosity will come into play if I hold space for those first feelings, and then, but not react with them, not to decide my behavior based on that first piece, right? Because that's my historical piece. And so I think it resonates really well with me. And it's funny because I did a mini session of eCPR at a friendship center, because I work a lot with First Nations people here in Ottawa, probably 40% of my clients. And I collaborate with friendship centers and community centers that are First Nations and Inuit focused. And we were doing a little workshop with the staff because I just wanted them to get a feel for this. And I had 2 staff members go up and do a real play. And one was like, I don't like this feeling stuff, but okay, I'm going to participate. I promised myself I would participate. And she was expressing how angry she was about something that happened to her. And the staff member she was working with did a really, really good job of connecting with listening, just listening. And she just, you could see visibly all of the anger leave her. And then she stops the role playing. She looks at me and she goes, oh, this actually works. Oh my gosh. And it was so funny to watch her do that and her go like it's gone. I'm not angry. Like it's just because she was really angry when she first started. And then it just all washed out of her. And you could watch it as if it was like physically leaving her body. And so it was beautiful to see that. And for her to be able to leave and let go of that problem that she had been angry about for months, very furious anger about this and resentments, and then it was gone. And so I see her sometimes in the hallway now. She does a lot of outreach work. So when I'm there on Tuesdays, I see her and she's like, it's still gone. The anger's still gone, Shontelle, you know?
Oh, yeah. So it sounds like in a way that people are using the strategy that you're using for themselves as well. So they're holding space for that anger and then maybe thinking around that as well.
Yeah, and if you've tried this yourself, so whether you try it as like whether you're a therapist or not, or a clinician or not, and you practice this yourself and you're connecting with yourself, that's the me CPR, you're connecting with yourself, which Dan, I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, but you're also then see how valuable it is and why you would want to use it and why you'd want to stay there, even in a clinical practice, until you really get that connecting piece with somebody before you move on to the other stuff that therapists do. So it's really quite beautiful.
So maybe this is a good place to ask this question. Joanne asks, do you discuss forgiveness? And another person says, this is really helpful, I think, but regarding the first intention of eCPR, it has been my experience that when you ask people to speak out their feelings, they can shut down because they don't know how to talk about emotions and their bodies. Can you give an example of how you might help people out of their shell with just phrasing or framing that? That's very...
Well, yeah, we don't, I mean, generally, and I imagine Shontelle, you know, you can say something about this too. We rarely, if ever, would ask somebody how they felt. Yes, when you ask somebody how you're feeling, especially, I notice this with my children, they would say, oh, you're being a psychiatrist. People really they want to feel that it's safe to share feelings. And we actually encourage the connecting through feelings first being our feelings first, even more than their feelings first. Because many people come in and they've been taught, you know, not to express their emotions. That's a pretty, you know, it's men and women. And I had a really very clear example of this. There was a chaplain who was in England, and he was a Quaker. Anyway, he had been in the first day of the training, just really you could tell holding a lot in, holding a lot in, holding a lot in. And at one point on the second day, he started to cry. And it was about a relationship that he was in, and I said, "Oh my, it's really so wonderful that you can share some of these emotions." And he said, "I felt I needed permission to share my emotions." And it's almost, and how did you get the permission? I said, he said, because you shared your emotions. And I think this is contrary to a lot of traditional counseling training, which sort of teaches, you know, you keep your feelings to yourself, you're the counselor, and they have to share their feelings. Well, when people are in distress, especially, they want to know they're with a human being. And I first went to see my therapist, and I was just out of a hospital, and I was very shaky. And I said to him, I'd been in analysis where I didn't see the guy, and I was lying on a couch, and I wanted to see the person. I want to see a human being, see them smile, see them, you know, their expression. So I said to this guy, I said, first and foremost, I really, really hope you will be real. And he gave a most terrific response. He said, I'll try. I mean, he didn't say I've taken a course on being real. And so a lot of emotional CPR is to give people permission to be authentic. You know, when you're with somebody, if you can be authentic and you can be genuine, they feel it's okay to be that way. And Carl Rogers called it congruent. It's a kind of a complicated term, but it was really being authentic. He said, when your eyes and ears and, you know, nonverbal, your gestures correspond to what you're saying and your thoughts, then you're congruent. You're not saying, you know, I really care about you, or, you know, I really want to get to know you. And so non-verbally is a whole nother expression. I'd like to go on a little bit here to some of the others so that people have a bit of an idea, and then we could, and I like this, Shontelle, thank you very much. It's amazing. Here we are, you know, thousands of miles apart and, you know, whatever, but I feel like you're right here.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's partly because we both are learning to practice, you know, this, you know, expression, this mode of being. It's a way of being. And people, by the way, they come to this training, many people, especially people with, you know, clinical or practitioner background, they say, oh, a new tool for my toolkit. And I'm like, no, this is really about your own development. So we're really encouraging people's personal development as a way of being differently, more than, you know, well, I learned this skill or that skill. It is who you are and how you are with yourself, as Shontelle was saying. You practice eCPR and really get to know yourself, and then you can be with the other person. And this is really, after sharing, the third intention here is I will share these broader feelings and thoughts with you and stay with you. You know, it makes me I'm a little frightened of what you're saying, but I'm staying with you. Or that's, you know, whoa, that's amazing what you're saying, but I'm still right here. And
Yeah.
You want to say something to that, Shontelle?
Yeah, I do. So when they had asked the question about that, about, you know, would you ask them about their feelings, that sort of thing, I would do the same thing as you, Dan, in that I would reverse it and I would say what I am thinking or feeling or what I am noticing. You know, I'm noticing that I feel really angry when I hear you say that story, that you were treated that way. Right? So I wouldn't be afraid, even as a clinician, to do that, because that's a part of me connecting. And they might be surprised that anger is the feeling. That might not be their feeling, right? And then they would come back with a response around that. They might be surprised that somebody actually cares enough to be upset, you know, or that it's unorthodox for a therapist to express their thoughts or feelings, because we're often taught not to express in our, you know, our current school of thought around psychotherapy. So I go there. I go there, but as Dan said, that is the roots, like the Rogerian approach, that is the roots of my tree. I have tools on top of that, but this is the beginning. This is where I come from. So this isn't a separate skill per se. This is how I approach every day, right? And that's why Dan feels connected, even though we haven't seen each other in a while and we're far apart from each other right now, is because he knows that authentic nature is there and that I'm fully present here, only doing this task, and want to be fully present with everybody that's here, right? Which is hard to do when you can't see anybody, right? And so paying full attention is the key. And then that's how I can then share what's going on, because I'm fully paying attention right now.
It is helpful that I can see you, Shontelle.
Yes.
Even sometimes one other person can make a huge difference, and being able to feel their presence really can be very grounding and very reassuring. And I think that's a lot of what peer support is about. It's really just, you don't have to, have had lived experience of being labeled. You just lived experience of living. And so the next slide, actually 2 forward, Regina, if you could, because we already saw the thing. Yeah. So this fourth intention is also a very difficult one for people with a clinical or provider role. And I recognize, since I am a psychiatrist, people come to me and they want me to do something, fix something, and tell them what's wrong with them. So you can't just start off with this and say, I'm not going to do any of this, fixing. But keep in mind that if your first response is that, it's going to set them further in a passive role. And I don't know why she's here. Could you, excuse me. I'm still on this.
That's okay. No worries.
It's okay. They're not really worried for the.
Right.
She just walks right in. I'm having a lot of feelings right now.
That's all right. It's okay.
My first response, I tried to hold back on. Don't you know?
It's very authentic.
It felt very, very real. So trying to be with the person, because, when you're with somebody in distress, it's just human nature. Their request and your response is often, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And with children as well. And have you gone for a walk? Have you done deep breathing? And almost 9 out of 10 times people are irritated because it isn't their idea. And, they may think they want you to tell them what they should be doing. But really all they want is initially is for you to connect and be with them. And so I will try to be with you is really hard because you have to, again, the internal dialogue, and, it's just this instance right now, I wanted to say, you got to get out of here. But I wanted to feel a little bit of what was so insistent on my wife being here. And I knew she had a reason. But I think it is really hard to be with both your feelings and someone else's feelings. I mean, it's hard enough to be with your own feelings, but somebody has a strong feeling. And Shontelle, you said something else that really sort of caught my attention very much. You might have the feeling, and it may not be their feeling. You might be, angry about something from what they're saying, but by expressing at least something authentic that you're going through, it starts the flow. And I think it's the flow of emotion that gets blocked inside. And if you can activate it with another person, then it'll start to be activated inside. The flow is very, very important. And so we try to encourage people to not say, being with you right now, I feel like you're sad. We're trying to identify what they're feeling. No, I might be feeling some sadness. Actually, they might be angry. Something happened that, and they might be feeling very frightened initially. Their feelings are often layered upon layer. Mm-hmm. But they're not gonna get to them if you say, this is what you should do. Unfortunately, I don't want to beat up the mental health system too much, but in case you didn't notice, fixing, judging, advising. And doctors are really, really, I mean, we're so quick to grab a prescription pad and, just fix it. Here, take this. And I gave a presentation recently, and this woman stood up and she said, I'm so tired of my doctor giving me medication because he's upset. and we'll do a real play, and somebody will start fixing. We'll say pause. We'll do a pause, and then we'll ask the person who's in the assisting role, what were you feeling at that moment that you said, it'd be good if, you went and, bought some new clothes or something or whatever. And they, inevitably, it's their own anxiety they're trying to alleviate. Someone comes to you and they've lost somebody in their life, and you're thinking about, your own family or some loss in your family. Someone would come to me, and if they had an eating disorder, I'm like, I think of my sister and her eating disorder. I was then wanting them to, get weighed, get on a behavioral program again. So I don't know. It sounds like, Shontelle, you were you could identify with this. You've seen this happen.
Oh yeah, and I think as clinicians, we put ourselves in this precarious position of fixing. Wow, right? Take the pressure off yourself, and tell yourself that you don't need to fix anything, and that see how more empowered you are yourself in your practice when the outcome isn't solely on your shoulders, and that you might be able to help by helping them explore what might be best for them. And kind of going back to that part, so you're empowering them as opposed to you taking on all this control and power, which you really don't have anyway, right? So you kind of have to get real with yourself a bit, that you really don't have that level of power to cure people, right? And or control people. And so if you're going to go home a lot less stressed yourself if you realize that you're in this together with the person, we CPR, and that they're going to do whatever they feel is best for themselves ultimately anyway in the end, whether it's comply with medications or, exercise, eat well, explore their own thoughts and feelings, connect with people. You might give them all kinds of advice, but they're only going to do what they're going to do. So, having them own the plan increases the chance that they will actually take care of the plan, right? Because
you really anticipate the fifth one there very much.
Yeah.
Well, they go together, and I mean, we call these the empowering sort of intentions. But instead of coming in as the expert, we encourage people to come in, no matter what their role is, as a collaborator, as Shontelle was saying. And I think it does decrease burnout. I'm a lot less exhausted when I think the solution is within the individual or family. I work with families a lot. I say, well, the family really has the capacity together to work out the issues. So I will sometimes say out loud or just to myself, I'm not sure what's best for you, but together we're going to explore the unknown. People really don't like it if you say too much out loud, I don't know what's best for you. But at least say or imply the capacity to heal is number 6, is really within the person themselves. Artificial divide 5 and 6, they really go together very much. And you alluded to that, Shontelle. The power, and these all are about power. The person comes in, they feel powerless to begin with, and if you just say do A, B, and C, they're going to feel even more powerless. But in order to recover, they have to recover their power, their voice, and they can't do that alone. And the last one is we authentically create new life, new voice, and new hope in the present moment, which is revitalizing. So we together too. And I believe actually when you connect with somebody on this level, you both experience new life. You both experience feeling revitalized. It's not just, and this is what I think draws people to be therapists and be counselors and be involved in helping, is to experience that. It's called the peer effect. It can be the helper effect. There's something that helps you to help another person, and I think that's because it's not a one-way street. When help is genuine, you experience the healing as they experience the healing. It's a very mysterious process, but it's not, we think very binary and very digitally, you know, directionally, but these are interactional, and they're both and. Both my daughters have really tried to get me out of binary thinking. They're like, and they're, you know, male, female, you know, we have both within us. We're anima, animus, gender is very socially defined. And at first, when they started telling me this, I'm like, come on, you know, this is some new age, new fad. Well, I don't know if it's happening in Canada, but people, young people here, this is widespread. It's not just, you know, single gender bathrooms. It's like you know, the way people dress, the way they present themselves, very much to be fuller people, I think. It's still, in my generation, a little bit hard to quite grasp, where, you know, and I do think, though, that it's this bidirectional aspect. Are there any other, some questions? Maybe we should just
yeah, people are just indicating I love applying a lot of important principles of peer support to all clinical services. So much needed. Fabulous training. Love it. We CPR. So awesome. Thank you for an excellent reflective discussion. So there are some of the comments that we're seeing. And just a thank you for the idea of holding space for my feelings as well as others, especially when working with people expressing intense emotion, which I can find intimidating at times. Also for the reminder of the power of listening as opposed to trying to find solutions and fix or help people. Yeah, so.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
I wanted to to mention a character who's very, very important in my life. People must be familiar with the story of the Grinch. We actually have people experience that their heart grows through the practice of emotional CPR. And by their heart growing, I mean their emotional heart, and their feelings actually can grow. And this particular Grinch was given to me after I did an eCPR presentation, and they said, you're really talking about the transformation that the Grinch went through. I guess it was the littlest, quietest, or smallest member of Whoville that yelled out, you know, and got the attention of the Grinch. But this Grinch has a heart that grows.
I love it. That's so fantastic.
And,
I'd like to read out one comment, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this person says, I'm inspired by the level of authenticity, always hard for me to say, of eCPR asks of us. This is so different from learning a new tool. I feel challenged to work on my own emotional barriers to being truly present with people. It's so much more difficult to sit with your own emotions rather than rush in to offer answers. Are there any strategies, maybe a question to ask yourself when with a client, that you use to bring your attention to what is influencing your motivation while working with people?
Wow, good question. How how to become more authentic? Well, I guess it's been through the practice of eCPR has actually helped me be much more authentic. Here I am, you know, saying it's important to be authentic with a group of people that are, you know, themselves struggling with that. They know when I am and when I'm not.
Right.
I find that it's very important to do this with other people, get feedback from other people, I mean, therapy can be helpful, listening, reading, how to become more authentic. It's really through relationships. I mean, it's through developing, you know, friendships over a period of time. When somebody can call you on, you know, in a very loving way, you know, what are you really, what are you really going through? Something's happening, and I don't know what it is. And I think ultimately it is other people who stretch us the most. And also, I think through, through expression, drawing can be very helpful. The arts are very helpful. To get out of our head, something to get out of our head. I find mindfulness is helpful. Mindful walking, mindful, I don't know, eating. My older daughter is just visiting, and she said, "Now let's all eat mindfully." It was really hard. We had to chew a lot more times. And we're going to do with her. She's a dancer. She wants to actually in 2 months integrate emotional CPR with dance. And it's interesting, these figures here that are showing up of two dancers, it looks like, for Regina and for Jen that I see. To get into the nonverbal is to get closer often to your authentic self. We have a public self, we have a mask we wear, and we have underneath that our more authentic self. And there is actually in this book that I wrote has a quote from a priest. His name was Louis Evely. I never met him, and he said that we have within us a mute being that leaps to our lover's voice. A mute being that leaps to our lover's voice, and that we didn't know it was there. But as soon as it appears, we know it's genuine. As soon as we experience it, we know that's more genuine to who we are. And it's really, I think, through love, in the broadest sense, you can love in many people if you open up. It doesn't mean that, it's total romantic love. The Greeks had many words for love, but it's caring and compassion and understanding, and much of what we're saying really adds up to loving yourself and loving other people.
Daniel, I wanted to also mention when we talk about cultural differences from a Canadian perspective, I think we're often quite shy or afraid of offending people of maybe different backgrounds or cultures than ourselves. And I think that actually is a barrier. It gets in our way. And, we guise it as politeness, but actually leading in with curiosity and being authentic ourselves as individuals, and knowing that my body language is unique to Shontelle, and that, yes, there are some generalities across, let's say non-Indigenous white culture, and then there's some generalities for other cultures. Really, each individually, we have our own set of body language. And when you're mirroring somebody or leaning into somebody, you're figuring that dance out. You're figuring out what the language is, the body language is between you and that person. So regardless of their cultural background or your cultural background or first languages, and I do a lot of work with Indigenous populations, and I get a lot of good feedback around them feeling understood by me, which Indigenous First Nations people in Canada don't feel understood. The oppression has been long and hard. So when I get that feedback, it tells me that I'm moving in the right direction, And when I'm wrong, they tell me I'm wrong, which means they feel safe to tell me I'm wrong. And then I can go from there and try to figure out what I misunderstood or didn't know, and how I can better understand. And being open to that creates the safety for us to keep that dance going of trying to understand each other. And I think it turns out quite beautiful. And so I would say lean in with curiosity to that, to the fact that my body language might be different from yours, or my perspective might be different, and that I'm here to understand and learn. And if we go into that whole thing, the whole experience mindfully, being present, like he said, mindfully eating, how do I become more mindful and present? I set the intention. When I go to the grocery store today, I'm really going to pay attention to being at the grocery store today and all the people around me. I'm going to notice the butcher. I'm going to notice, you know, the other customers that are near me. I'm going to notice the cashier, and I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to be present. I'm not going to be daydreaming about the future or thinking about the past. Then I can be more present, and I make less mistakes in the present moment because I'm here. I'm here. Right? And that's going to help us with that connecting piece. So that's how I approach it. And I think it helps us with the authenticness because I'm there. I'm not dismissing you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, Shontelle, I think that's wonderful. I think hopefully that's a response to one question that we did have, but things getting lost in translation. So hopefully that addresses that issue that just came up. I'm just mindful that we have about 3 minutes left. And I wonder if there are final things you wish to say. There is one note here from Isabella that we can who says that it's hard to get the level of connection, understanding, and life forward experience in a therapy session. Yes, is what you say about individual body language.
I wanted to just conclude with a dream of mine. And my dream is that everyone will learn some form of emotional CPR, so that no matter where you are, no matter what is happening, just like with CPR, if distress comes along, the people will be around you who will say, yes, I'll be with you. Yes, I believe you can get through this together. And maybe it might take more than one person. Sometimes it takes a couple of people. And I think that this can be overall reduce a lot of our maybe drug issues. People are medicating themselves to death because they don't know and they're frightened of their feelings. And I think it'll decrease stigma and discrimination. People, have strong feelings. They're rejected by other people because of people's own fears. I think there'll be less suicide. I mean, I don't think it's like going to solve all of our problems, but it would really make a much more healing society. So that's my dream. And we call that community CPR.
Daniel, maybe you want to speak to us a little bit about your upcoming event. We have a question here about how do we get the training?
Oh, yeah.
Where can I order the book? That's another one.
You can order the book at our website, emotional-cpr.org, emotional-cpr.org. We're planning a training in Oregon, probably Portland, Oregon, or Seaside, Oregon, April 25th and 26th. And Shontelle may have in Ottawa. You have one planned?
I don't have a specific date planned at the moment, but all you have to do is send me an email at info@masso. And if I have enough participants, I will absolutely run a group. I'm just going to put info@masso.
Oh, thank you so much.
On the chat room. And that's what so if we had enough to do a group, I would happily do a group. I just did one in the late fall here, and it was quite lovely. And we would continue to do, we will continue to run groups here, and we'll post them on my website as well, which is, I'll put that up as well. So those come up, and you can find me and there. And certainly, if you have a group of people who want to do it, we'd be happy to do that for a group as well.
Well, we have people saying they'd like to learn more. One person just notes that I can't see the email address you just mentioned, and I'm interested in the training. So maybe we just type that in. It's hard to talk and type. I totally
Oh, I see. Mine is only for the panelists. I'll do mine publicly.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that might be what be happening to me too.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah. So yeah, they can also find out about other trainings that we have by going to the same website. So all panelists and attendees. There we go. I'll redo it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Great.
Yes, we're getting close to the end.
We're actually at 12:01, so probably this is lunchtime in this part of the world, and I know we have people from all over the country, so probably we should just cheerio. Please, just for the panelists, please know that people have just been so appreciative of this work, saying that this is different and new and exciting, and they want more. So I think always when you're speaking, it's ever so nice to get that feedback that more please is always the response you're looking for. So really, really wonderful. Thanks so much for being just a great audience and for so many comments and questions that came in. I really appreciate that. It just, you know, it helps us understand that people are there and present and listening. And yeah, so thanks so much to everybody for their contributions, and especially to our wonderful panelists, Shontelle and Dan today. That was really amazing, as Rebecca says. Thanks very much.
Did you post for me my email? It's still coming up as private. People are asking for it and I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I posted it privately twice, but I can't seem to unprivate that.
No problem. So just your email, Shontelle?
And the website. So info@masso.ca and worldwidewebmasso.ca.
Worldwide. Okay.
They're both. They put them in it's in the private comments. That will help people reach that.
So maybe I can just cut and paste there.
Yeah, that should do it.
You know what?
Thank you kindly.
Oh, you're welcome. But actually, I don't see it. I apologize.
If you could put mine up too, somehow mine went to Shontelle.
Oh, that's a hoot.
So I'll mhaso.ca.
Maybe Jen, can you do that, Jen? And I'll just cut and paste Daniel's here.
Yeah. So for some reason it's just going straight to Daniel.
So that's
he already knows how to reach me.
So shoot.
Shontelle, what was yours again?
So info@mhaso.ca. And our website is masso.ca. So it's mental health and addiction.
Is that right? Oh, I think I did that wrong.
So mental health and addiction services of Ottawa. If you Google that, even you will find me very quickly.
Okay, great.
And my spelling of my name. You can't go wrong with that. If you spell Shontelle correctly, you will find me on the internet, and you can then contact me.
You know, I think this is explaining to a number of people have asked if they could please have a copy of this presentation. They wanted to use it in a classroom and various other places. So please have a look at our website, psyrehab.ca, and you'll find this copy in probably about 3 or 4 days. Dear Manny usually works to make that happen, and it just takes 3 or 4 days. So psyrehab.ca, you'll find a copy of this presentation.
It was nice to work with you again, Dan.
I think Dan's audio just might be off, but
somebody's planning to go to the Oregon training.
Nice.
Yay.
Nice.
Good. Excellent. All right. Well, it is 12:04, so I'm sure there's a lot of hungry bellies out there. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here again. Really appreciate it. And thanks again to our wonderful panelists to just bring a breath of fresh air to us today. Thank you.